Sorry about that, you guys. So he visited a cleric in Dera Bagudi, whose last name was Bagudi, or Bukti, I believe. Um, and he was sort of a white beard cleric that I think eventually got assassinated. He visited the kind of on the exact opposite side of Balkistan, Gwandar, Gwadar, which sort of has the odd distinction of being a closed city and also a city that Pakistan is promoting as the next Dubai, like it's going to be a big trade center. Well, you can imagine if it's not a completely closed city, but it's a city that needs a lot of permits to get into. That the state is very worried about like rebels there, all that kind of thing, and it's just kind of highly kept its eye. The government keeps its eye on it. So you can imagine a state that is both trying to promote growth. It has a new harbor being built by the central government in Islamabad, as well as being closed off. What sort of a odd situation that creates. The author mentioned that he thought coming in, it sort of looked like Las Vegas with all these neon signs and promotional deals. But when he went inside the city, he said it looked sort of like, I think like a Russian planned city that never really came to fruition. That you saw a lot in like the 60s and 70s. Kind of a lot of infrastructure in place, but no real breath or life to it in terms of what they're doing. Except for, of course, he says the old part of the city, which had all these fishermen that he visited who were all irritated because the new docks were pushing them off their old fishing pier and stuff. The third part he visits is Kedah. Kedah is actually really an important strategic spot for the United States because it's only a couple hundred miles, not even that, maybe 100 miles from Kandahar across the border in Afghanistan, and is often seen as sort of a routing point for um, uh, Taliban movement, Al Qaeda movement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that being said, um, uh, Canada does not necessarily experience a lot of terrorism itself. It's not necessarily that it's falling down. It's actually a city that functions decently, I guess, compared in Pakistan, but and it's also not controlled necessarily by the rebels, but there's a lot of like, or the Taliban or like more extremist organizations, but there's a lot of like safe houses and kind of networks that run through there. And the state kind of, in its dysfunction, doesn't really do a very good job of fighting those people, nor does it necessarily have the incentive to fight those people. Something else that was mentioned in this book is that even though Pakistan is our ally, they will, it's not like they're pro terrorists or pro Taliban, though they actually were before September 11th. But they're just sort of ambiguous towards the Taliban and terrorists and all those things. They're much more. Musharraf was much more worried about internal threats to his own legitimacy as president compared to some of the things the United States was more concerned about. So let's move into the dangerous territories. Now we're talking about the Northwest Frontier Province. We're talking about South Waziristan. We're talking about North Waziristan. We're talking about the what do they call it? The Gut. Where is that? The Swat. Yeah, the Swat Valley in Khyber. Yeah. And so essentially the way it works is that in the Northwest Frontier Province, it's sort of what do you say? Pakistani law, and even though it's uh, more wild than the rest of Pakistan, it's still nominally under control of the Pakistani military and Pakistani rule of law. But when you start getting into the federally administrated tribal regions, now a lot of people thought this is where Afghanistan is, or where Osama bin Laden was hiding after he fled Afghanistan. Um, you're really talking about an area that the central government in Pakistan has no control over. They talk a lot about like just don't mess with us, or like don't piss us off too much, I guess you'd say. But in terms of all internal rule, there's no Pakistani military there. It's pretty much like a no man's land, ruled by warlords. And just to give you an example, one of the warlord compounds I thought was really interesting. He was on, I don't know if this was on the Swat River or a different river. But there were two ways to get to his giant compound that he had built. One was to take all these back roads that took like 8 or 9 hours, kind of in a very roundabout, circuitous route that you could get your car there. Or the other one was the main road ran right across the river from this fairly large river that was fairly fast flowing. It wouldn't be easy to swim or anything like that. Right across the road from his compound. Well, you'd think that would be an easy fix if they built a bridge. Well, they don't have a bridge. They don't have any desire to build a bridge. What they have is a zip line. Now, unlike, say, like a bridge, that there can be a little more control, even though I guess you could blow it up and stuff. Going like through a zip line is, he said, it was pretty much like just going into the belly of the beast, taking the zip line into this mullah's, headquarters that essentially ruled more or less an entire province within the federally administered tribal regions. What else about this region? Yeah, he basically talked to a bunch of different groups. Now, it should be said that in these federal administrated tribal regions, there are people that are more moderate. All of them are sort of Islamists. There's not going to be anything like that exists in these federal administrated tribal regions. And they're all like very, anti-Jewish, anti-India, particularly in the Northwest Frontier area. But he talked to a number of people there that were really kind of said, we need to be an Islamic state, but we need to be reasonable within the confines of that state. That terrorism really needs to kind of terrorism for the purpose ends. He talked to somebody, let me see if I can find who it is, that he mentioned was a politician first, and his means were not, see, I'm not going to be able to find it, but, oh no, here it is. Rahman, Maulana Fazul Rahman. And he said that Rahman was actually very popular and had won a number of seats in electorates and had his own power base. And just, he said pretty much that we need to create Sharia law by nonviolent means, and that a lot of this terrorism stuff is kind of counterproductive. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I've been talking for a while now. Yeah, so he kind of talked about that. I guess the last part we'll talk about is, oh no, we forgot about the Punjab. Let's see, he goes to Lahore, Textilia, Peshawar. I guess Peshawar is in the Northwest Frontier Province, I think. Yeah, maybe. Oh man, I'm losing my voice a little bit. But his biggest connection in all this thing was to the Red Mosque. And the Red Mosque, even though it was a very strong, yeah, see there's a picture in Baluchistan. One of the things nice about this book is it did have some pictures that gave some context for what they were. But in the Red Mosque, Karachi, I can't find it. I think his name was Fazullah, or yeah, I'm sure I butchered that too. But he was an Islamist that, while not the extremist of the Northwest Frontier Province or the federally administrated tribal regions, for Islamabad, which relative to other parts of Pakistan is pretty darn moderate. Now, again, it's all relative, but he was actually a center of fundamentalism within Islamabad. Now, it actually sadly ended in a giant shootout where the government surrounded the Red Mosque. Him and his brother eventually died, the mullahs of this mosque. It was kind of interesting because they initially weren't radicalized. They were definitely more fundamentalist than, say, like the general parliament, but like I think it was just kind of one of those things that like so much of Pakistan is like a crack in the teacup leads to a flood out of the teacup, and that's what really happened with these brothers. That's what's kind of happened in Balkistan. So yeah, it's just kind of these what are seemingly small cracks or small differences. Kind of there's this culture of political what's the word I'm looking for? Antagonism, political antagonism among these various groups, that something that in the West might be smoothed out fairly easily becomes kind of this big divide and leads to violence and all sorts of stuff within Pakistan. So, eventually the author was kicked out after, what was he kicked out for? I think he got in bad with ISI. I haven't even mentioned ISI yet. ISI is essentially the CIA, the spooks of the federal government, and while being spun as sort of an anti-terrorist group, they actually do a huge amount of racketeering themselves and are certainly don't have their hands clean. You know what I'm saying? But eventually, for whatever internal reason, the ISI finally decided to kick him out of the country, and he had to leave. So the book ends with him writing a final piece that's pretty good about the Sufis and the joyous moments of the dancing, and is kind of a nice little counterpoint to all the politics and sort of the grit and the grind of what is Pakistan. So I think that's pretty much it. To Live or Perish Forever, 2 Tumultuous Years in Pakistan by Nicholas Schmidle. All right. Check it out, you guys. I got it for $3. Check it out. Bye.